All right, newsflash. Pastors in the Dallas, Texas area, FRC's Watchman on the Wall is hosting a pastor's briefing this Thursday at Prestonwood Baptist Church. I'll be there. Dr. Jack Graham will be there, along with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. And we'll have many others. To find out more or to register, go to watchmanpastors.org/events. That's watchmanpastors.org/events. Or you can go to tonyperkins.com and get there just as fast. All right, earlier today, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the case of former high school football coach Joe Kennedy, also by the way, a retired Marine, who was fired for praying in public on the 50-yard line after football games, something that was fine at first when he did it alone, but became an issue for the school when students voluntarily began to join him. Opponents of his prayer practice called it religious coercion. Will our nation's highest court, the U.S. Supreme Court, agree with that? Well, joining me here in studio to talk about today's case, the oral arguments that took place at the Supreme Court, is one of Coach Kennedy's attorneys, Mike Berry of First Liberty Institute, also a Marine. Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
All right, so your take on today's oral arguments?
Overall, I'm pretty optimistic. It's always hard to predict what's going to be the outcome just based on oral argument. But if I had to make a prediction, I would guess that the outcome will probably be either 6-3 or possibly 5-4 in favor of Coach Kennedy, which means in favor of religious freedom.
Okay, Mike, so let's step back. Now that we got that perspective, let's step back and let's talk about, because this has been a few years. We've actually had Coach Kennedy on the program. You've been on here many times talking about this. Goes back quite a ways.
7 years.
Yeah, 7 years. Give our audience kind of a refresher on what this is all about.
Well, this started with Coach when he was hired. Before he ever coached his first football game, he watched a movie called Facing the Giants. Which I assume many of our viewers have probably seen themselves, the Kendrick brothers.
Sherwood Films, yes.
And when he watched it, he said he fell to his knees and just felt convicted that if he was going to take this job as a coach, win or lose, didn't matter how the team played, that he was going to give thanks to God for the opportunity to be a coach. And mostly because he grew up in that area in Bremerton, Washington, and he, by his own account, was a very troubled youth. Created a lot of trouble for others, particularly in the schools that he attended, and he really felt that this was sort of his opportunity to make good on a lot of the bad things that he had done. And as Coach himself says, the ironic thing he says, of all the things that I've done in my life, the thing that got me in trouble was praying, right? And so you can't make this up. And so he made that commitment to God that he was going to pray at the 50-yard line when the game was over. But importantly, Tony, his commitment and his covenant was just between him and God. It didn't matter if anybody else was around or not. And then after a few months of doing this by himself, a couple of his players came up to him and asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm just giving thanks for what just happened." And they said, "Well, if we're Christians, are we allowed to do this too?" And he just chuckled and said, "It's a free country. You can do whatever you want." And this went on for years. Never any issue. The school district, by their own statement, said not one complaint ever, no evidence ever of any coercion, anybody being pressured to participate. This was a good thing between Coach and the Lord. And then later players began to join him, and the guidance was school employees, which includes teachers, coaches, principals, et cetera, they're not to encourage nor discourage students from engaging in their own. So that's what he did. He just said, if you want to do it, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. And, of course, no good deed goes unpunished. This went on for about 8 years based on a compliment from somebody from a different school who saw this happening, said, "I think it's great that you guys allow this coach to pray." The school district's attorneys got involved and said, "Well, wait a minute. We might have an issue with this." And at first, this is really important on the case, at first they told Coach, "We don't have a problem with you praying. You just can't pray with the players. You can't lead the players in prayer." And Coach said, "That's totally fine. That's what I did in the beginning. I'm happy to go back to that because that's the promise I made to God. It was just between me and God." And then, of course, as we know, the school district, through their lawyers, started moving the goalposts, saying, "Well, now we know you've complied. You're not praying with players, but now you're praying where people can see you right? It's public. It's visibly demonstrative prayer. We don't want you to do that. Coach served, as you said, 20 years in the Marine Corps. He fought for our freedoms. He sacrificed for our First Amendment rights. They messed with the wrong Marine, Tony, and he said, I can't do that. I can't give up the very freedoms that I was willing to die for. And all I'm asking for is the right and the ability to pray by myself 15 to 30 seconds after the game's over. The kids have already left the field. They're singing the fight song in the stands. I just want the opportunity to give thanks. And the school district said, if you do it, you're fired. And that's how we ended up in court.
So, Mike Berry, what's at stake in the outcome of this case?
Well, obviously for Coach Kennedy, and if it's just about him, it's just about his the ability to get his job back as a coach with his First Amendment rights intact. But really, the question you're asking is what's at stake for the rest of us? Why would the Supreme Court take a case like this? And the implications are massive. If a public school district, so a government employer, can fire somebody for doing what Coach Kennedy did, praying at the 50-yard line at the end of the game, they can prohibit a Jewish teacher from wearing a yarmulke. They can prevent a Muslim teacher from wearing a head covering. They can prevent a teacher from crossing themselves and saying a quick prayer over their salad and their square pizza before they eat in the cafeteria. It opens the door for the government to trample on the First Amendment rights of millions of Americans.
And Mike, we're almost out of time, but that's been happening over the last several decades. Is this actually a case that can move back this incursion into religious freedom to where we actually will get some of our freedom back?
Absolutely. This has the opportunity to do that. There's a case called the Lemon case that's been on the books for years. It's never been expressly overturned by the Supreme Court. Today, and I encourage people to listen to the arguments. You can hear them online now. Quite a few of the justices said, indicated that they were willing to go back to this lemon test and get rid of it for good. So this case could put the final nail in the coffin of the Lemon case.
That's significant. That it goes back to is that the 70s?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, Mike Berry, always great to have you on the program. You guys do tremendous work. We're so thankful for you.
Thanks for having me.